Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Kid Naruto Got the Power and Experience of Adult Naruto Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
In Anbu, it was a tradition to have Hell Month. New recruits went through a month of hard, exhausting physical training and mental hazing. Kakashi really believed in Hell Month. He thought it weeded out the weak, marked the strong, and brought the masks together as brothers. So, Kakashi decided to make his cute little genin go through his own Hell Month. He knew they didn't like him. The sky above him was a deep, rich gray, and a cool breeze was blowing through the training ground 7 forests. As they finished their laps, his one open eye followed his sweating genin. Their chests went up and down as they tried to get air. Their legs were shaking from the effort, and Sakura finally fell down because she was too tired to keep going. Naruto and Sasuke stopped, picked her up with their hands, and carried her on their shoulders for 2 more laps before Sasuke also fell down. He let Naruto run 3 more laps before telling him to stop. Then Kakashi jumped off the perch and landed quietly. "You 3 did well, but I think you should do a few more laps." They cried out in pain. He looked at them with brown eyes that moved quickly over their small bodies. They looked completely worn out. "Sensei, can we take a break, please?" He looked like he was thinking about it, and then his eyes went to them. "It depends on how important your lives are to you." They looked a little confused and scared at the same time. He looked up at the clouds that were coming. It was going to start raining soon. The light gray sheet of clouds had become much, much darker. It looks like today's training will end early. You 3 are at a huge disadvantage. You're children in a world of teens and adults. You don't have the reach and stamina of grown adults, you won't have the chakra capacity, and you won't have the physical strength and endurance. He sighed. In short, even if you are skilled, your age and size are your biggest weaknesses against older opponents. My sensei taught me this when I was your age. To be as physically fit as possible, you can't be average or even above average. Mentally, you are geniuses, but physically that's what I'm trying to change. But even if you reach the peak of the physical limit you can currently reach, you'd still need more. He stopped and took out a kunai. He said, "You need equalizers. Weapons are one of those things that level the playing field. When I was a child, I had my father's chakra blade. It didn't make the battlefield level, but it did make the slope less steep. It saved my life several times, and these will do the same for you." The made a small cut on his thumb with the kunai. He ran his bloody finger along the back of his psalm to open a scroll. He opened it up, and white smoke came out of it. Now, there are 3 weapons on the surface of the scroll. A dark gray matted metal sword that is only about 1.5 feet long. It had 2 blades, and the handle was made of rich, dark wood that looked like obsidian. Next to it was a pair of thick leather gloves with hardened balls of the same matte metal on the knuckles and a light patchwork of seals written on them. Last was a set of brushes, 2 more scrolls, and a set of double-length kunai made of the same metal as the other items. The other is called chakra. He paused to catch his breath. In the ninja world, chakra and steel are the things that make everyone equal. He looked back up at the sky. The gray was all that was left. A deep, dark color that filled the sky but didn't leave anything behind. The smell of rain was everywhere. "You get these." He took the sword and gave it to Sasuke. "Kenjutsu seems like a good choice for you," he said. The blade has 2 edges and is made of a metal that moves chakra very quickly. He took the gloves and one of the scrolls and gave them to Sakura. "Physically, you're the weakest of the 3 of you, Sakura. That has nothing to do with you, because you train as hard as the rest of your team, but there are physical limits you just can't get past, at least not yet. The strength technique that Tsunade-sama uses is messed up by these gloves. It's not even close to her ability to crush mountains, but it will catch your opponents off guard. The scroll is full of theory about genjutsu and a few easy techniques. You're very good at controlling your chakras. Use it your advantage." Last, he turned to Naruto, who seemed eager and expectant. "You shouldn't mess around with fuinjutsu, Naruto," he said. "But I don't think I can say anything to change that." So, he threw the scroll at the boy and said, "That's intermediate fuinjutsu theory. Before you try to put anything in place, please come see me. I don't want you to kill yourself by accident while trying to make something. Both the brush set and the ink are good for your chakras. I just can't say it enough. The kunia are also chakra conductors." They are twice as long as normal and were made for close combat. They just sat there in silence. Then he heard a loud crack and looked up. In the now dark sky, he could see faint signs of lightning. Let's go get lunch. Sarutobi. The room smelled like sweetened tobacco. It was harsh and pungent, a mix of damp and smoky tobacco and sweet burnt fruit that overpowered the smells of everything it touched. It was a good blend, and went down smooth as he took deep breaths and let it fill his lungs to the brim. His eyes looked at the blonde boy who seemed rather bored sitting in front of him. Over the past year, he hadn't known how many hours he'd spent thinking about the blonde boy in front of him and wondering how he'd react to the news when he finally told him. He'd expected anger, rage, depression, and sadness. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew it would be emotional. But the boy in front of him didn't seem to care. The news that he was a demon's host had gotten no response. I don't think you realize how important this is, Naruto-kun. The blonde kid smiled back and took a big drink. I do, he said. But it looks like you don't care. It's hard to act like I do, when I really don't. The boy looked into his eyes and said, I'm not blind, Ji-san. Do you know that when I funnel chakra, the seal shows up? He didn't know that, and he suddenly wondered how something as simple as that had gotten by his Anbu without being noticed. People have never liked me. I have been noticing that for some time. Other kids won't play with me, and when I walk up to a vendor's stand, they give me mean looks and try to scare me away. At the orphanage, the matron didn't seem to care about anything that happened to me. I thought at first that it was something I did. People might not have liked me because I was bad. So I tried to be good, and I was good, but no one cared. He stopped and took a breath. Guilt started to build up in him, and he forced himself to look at the young boy. Then I thought it was something my parents did. Did you know? He stopped and took a breath. So I figured it was something else. You realize. I hated that there was something I couldn't find out. I didn't like not knowing, and I was mad for a while. And then. He seemed to be thinking for a few moments as his big blue eyes looked out the big open windows. Have you known me for how long? The boy in front of him wasn't the happy-go-lucky child he'd seen many times over the past year and a half. It was the boy he'd only caught glimpses of before, the boy Yoshino had seen and Kakashi had thought was there. It was the other face of Uzumaki Naruto, and the Hokage started to feel afraid. He thought of his old student. After working on storage seals for a few months, I learned that chakra could be stored. That chakra was a form of energy, and that kind of energy can't be destroyed. You'd need a very complicated seal to keep the Kyuubi safe. I can't believe that seal is on my stomach. I've tried to read it, but I can barely understand how it's put together. The hairs on my cheeks, the hatred of the people in the village, and the fact that I was born on the same day that the Kyuubi was supposedly killed. Ji-san is not hard to figure out. I was mad for a while, mad that I had been chosen, mad that people hated me for things I couldn't change, mad that everything was unfair. But I just stopped being mad, and when I did that, I realized I no longer cared. The people in the village don't matter. What they think doesn't matter to me. Even though the villagers are mean to me, my friends are nice to me. All I need are my friends and I'm fine. He thought about what the boy said. Naruto had known for a while, but even before that, he had figured out that people hated him based on what little information he had. Not for the first time in his life, the Sandaime wondered if what he was doing was right. Again today, he felt like he was doing something wrong, like he would regret the decisions he made right now in the future. Naruto-kun, sometimes it's hard to be a leader. When the Yondaime made you a Jinchuriki, he did something good. Even when they are trying to do good, leaders sometimes make mistakes. He left it open that he was talking about himself. The boy nodded to show that he understood and sighed. I can't change what's already happened, I know. Naruto-kun, wait. Please. He looked back at the Sandaime. The boy seemed calm, not the least bit upset by what was going on. If anything, he seemed sad, maybe even felt pity. He would have laughed if it weren't so sad. A child feeling sorry for an old man who had hurt him. He sighed. I want you to know that if you ever have any questions or feel like you need to talk to someone, I'm here. Naruto stopped on his way to the door, his small, childlike body freezing. He turned around, his blue eyes suddenly intense. I'll keep that in mind, Gigi. He shut the door and left the room. The Sandaime leaned back in his chair and took a long, deep drag from his pipe. His tobacco was almost gone. Naruto, please, sensei, can we go on a mission? More than a month has passed. His childish voice was as shrill as he could make it. He saw Kakashi almost unnoticeably flinch at the sudden sharp sound. He smiled, his eyes shining with joy. The sun stood behind him, giving his blonde hair a light halo. He twisted the chakra-sensitive blades Kakashi had given him on one of his fingers. Kakashi gave him a look of serious confusion, and he sighed. His sensei was too good at acting. He turned to Sasuke and Sakura. They seemed to agree with him. "Think you're ready to go on missions? We're sure we're ready? Do you now?" He looked at them with his eyes, and the three of them shuddered. Kakashi was a slave driver. No, this Kakashi was a slave driver. This Kakashi was fresh out of Anbu and still had a lot of problems. His Kakashi had years to deal with his problems, years to calm down and vent, and work through his emotions. But this Kakashi was a better teacher overall. "We do," he said with confidence. No one could say no to him. Well, he felt a sudden pressure on him, like he'd just realized how heavy gravity could be. Sasuke and Sakura were trying their best to stay standing next to him. Kakashi's voice was like ice, a barren snowfield with no warmth, only the harsh touch of cold, and a slow frozen death as mercy. "Okay," he said, and the pressure was gone. Behind his mask, Kakashi could be seen smiling widely. "Follow me," he said, and they did. After a few minutes of light jogging, Team 7 appeared in front of the mission office. Without saying a word, Kakashi pushed them in, and the room went quiet. It reminded him of the first time he went to the mission office. It felt like a long time ago, even though it hadn't happened yet. Team 7 reporting for first mission posting, Hokage-sama. Kakashi seemed too happy, and Hokage-sama could tell it was making Sakura and Sasuke nervous. He turned to them and smiled, and they smiled back. Everything would be fine. "Good," said the old Kage with a smile. "There are 4 open mission choices right now. All D ranks, naturally. Getting rid of weeds in a garden. The new Inuzuka clan Ninken is being walked. Babysitting. Or you could spend the day helping the construction camp move things. All activities have a pay grade of 150 yen. Kakashi looked at the 3 of them and said, "You will do the work. You decide what you want to do." He turned around and let them talk among themselves, so Naruto could look at his young friends. "I think we should take up gardening," Sasuke said. "That seems like the most boring of them all." "No, he's right, Sasuke-kun. Think about it, watching children. Even with this headband, which glistened in the sun, no kids would take us seriously if we were 6. And the Inuzuka clan Ninken will be worse than any little kids we'll be watching. Plus, they get really big and strong. I have seen them drag their partners around before. I mean, gardening is the most boring thing we could do, but it's our best choice." Sasuke nodded and looked up. "We'll take gardening, Hokage-sama. Ah, you picked well. At this time of year, the Hyuga gardens are very pretty. Come on, you 3, let's go," Kakashi said. He grabbed Sasuke and Sakura by the collars of their shirts and gave him a light kick in the behind. And wow. You're probably thinking, where's the rest? Well, this would be longer, but I'm in a slump and don't feel like doing anything, let alone writing. For the past 2 weeks I've opened up this chapter and just stared at it for 15 minutes, only to say, fuck it, and go to bed. This has happened at least twice a day for the past 2 weeks. I've been working on a story for about a year now, and I want to know what you guys think of it. It's just the first chapter, but I want to know what you think. It's just an idea, but I can't get it out of my head. In the East Naruto, the village smelled like rotting people. It smelled like poop, death, and rotting meat. It was a strong smell that burned his nose and made him want to throw up. He looked at his mentor with sky-blue eyes. The brown-haired man looked at him with an eyebrow raised in amusement. He seemed to enjoy the fact that Naruto couldn't keep his lunch down. The odor. That smells like bribery, boy. People's money and food are taken as taxes, and given to the lord and ladies instead of being used to fix the roads, fix the sewers, keep the water running, pay the police force, etc. When his teacher laughed, his voice seemed loud but sounded small. 1. Chengdu is one of the oldest cities in the West that has been split. It's been around for almost 1,000 years, and legend has it that the first people were born not too far from Chengdu. When the big black egg that held heaven and earth broke, Pangu escaped because he felt like he was being suffocated. This let out everything that is in the world today. I don't think anyone still believes the myths though. Naruto was happy. He loved the myths, legends, and history here. It seemed like everything was old and had a story, and everything led back to another myth, legend, or story. It was strange, this ancient yet new land. It was strange to think that a great ocean separated this world, this land, this continent from the one he was born on and the one he had fled from. Then his smile vanished as the smell hit him again. A local warlord named Jin Yunpeng is in charge of Chongqing. He is a small-time warlord, and his power doesn't even reach outside the city. He's our top priority. Naruto nodded to show that he understood, but he still pulled his dark brown cloak tighter around him and tried to hide his face. Yellow hair was rare in these parts, and blue eyes were even rarer, especially this far inland. The mainlanders didn't have much contact with outsiders and traders, and it wasn't impossible, but it was unusual enough for random people to remember his face. The story goes that when Pagun broke the egg of the world and got out, he looked at the empty void and howled in pain because he saw nothing there. He cried in the void for who knows how long, until his tears fell on the world's egg and made the rivers and seas. The land was made from what was left of the egg. When Pagun saw what he'd done, he tried to make something out of the nothingness. He gave up a lot. He took his eyes out of his head to make the sun and moon. The night's tapestry was made from his skin. The stars came from his bones. His blood gave birth to life. Man was made in his mind. I don't understand. His teacher, who wore brown, laughed again. When Pagun saw nothing, he realized how awful and terrible it was. In these slums, there is nothing here. Children go hungry on these streets, men steal and kill, and women and girls sell their bodies. And the rich, the warlord, and his lords, don't care or don't notice. There is nothing here, but something came from nothing. I still don't understand. He had learned early on that, unlike in Konoha, it was much better to admit he didn't understand than to wallow in his ignorance. The city is all alone. People, I mean regular people, go along with it because things aren't too bad yet. Even though it's bad, it's not as bad as what they've been through before. But as soon as things start to get worse, the crowd will start to get angry, as they usually do. When the people get angry, the nobles' heads fall. Some Nobel Prize winners know and worry about this. But they are powerless. We can help with that. We're both young and old. Lao Sheng was a man who was well past middle age. His hair was turning gray, and his skin was starting to wrinkle and get tanned from the summer sun. He was unusually old in the divided West, well past 60, and his knowledge, wisdom, and royal lineage showed. Boy, the time is right for a revolution. I think you could be the one to show the way. Me? Yes, you, Lao Sheng said. Naruto looked at him like he was crazy, and Lao Sheng laughed again. Yeah. You want to be great, you're young, and you're a leader by nature, even if you're rough around the edges. Naruto and Lone Sheng looked up when they heard a hawk cry. It circled high in the sky, its huge wings tipping on clouds before circling and swinging in an arch. It cried again, and Naruto saw Lao Sheng smile. When it cried a third time, Lo Sheng laughed with joy. It's hard to find close friends, Naruto. Remember that a good friend is a friend for life. He kicked his horse, and it neighed in irritation. Follow me, he said, and the horse swung its tail to the left, then to the right, and then neighed again. Zhaoxi as she poured the rich mint tea for her father, Zhaoxi bowed deeply to show her respect. She put a bowl of honey next to him and bowed again. Zhao's father used to be a strong man. She had seen paintings of him when he was young, nearly 30 years before he became a general under the Golden Steed. Back then, he was only 20 years old, and his face and eyes were strong and bright. Now, though, those deep gray pits were tired, and his hair was gray. Large bags under his eyes and wrinkles marred a once smooth face. Thank you, daughter, your service is very much appreciated. It's my pleasure, father. She hated his harsh words, cold tone, and emotionless way of dealing with everything. It was hard to believe he was the same man he was when he was much younger and she was a child. He used to be kind and friendly, but it seemed like age had taken away his soft touch. She would have sighed, but it would have been rude to do so in front of her father. Instead, she bowed again and went back to the kitchen to get the plate of food that the servants had made. She walked on hard, pale wooden floors, and her feet took her to the kitchen, where she saw servants, who were really just peasants, rushing around trying to make a meal for her father's unexpected guests. My lady. She turned toward the voice that had called her. It was an old woman with a wrinkled face and graying hair. Like most of the staff here, she was old. Zhaoxi couldn't say anything because she seemed to be surrounded by old people and death. Yes? My lady, we're out of rice, so we can't. No more rice. That made her frown, because just a week before, her father had ordered 150 kilos of rice to be delivered. What happened to the shipment that was supposed to arrive 2 days ago? It was never sent. If she could have cursed, she would have. Instead, she let out a long sigh. The old worker lady was shocked by her behavior, but Zashi decided it was best to ignore her for now. She knew what had happened to the rice, and it made her very angry. In the past, no one would dare steal from her father. In the past, her father was a man no warlord would dare mess with, but after the Jade Dragon fell, her father was lucky to keep what he had. She reached into her long, flowing dress, pulled out a money purse from under a small pocket covered by a piece of yellow cloth, and counted out 30 gold coins. Go with one of the boys to the market. Buy 20 kilograms of rice. Have them bring it here and cook it today. If you fight for the difference, you can keep it. The old woman looked at the coins with a gleam in her eye. Zashi knew she would have taken some of it anyway, but letting her do it would make sure she got a fair deal. As Zashi walked slowly back to her father from the kitchen, she thought about how to tell him the bad news. As she got closer, she stopped when she heard calm voices. It sounded like something bad had happened, and her father's guests had arrived. Zhao, my old friend. She had never heard that voice before. Dare she peek? She did, indeed. She peered around the corner and gasped when she saw him. He had aged over the years, with his hair turning gray and his face getting a few wrinkles, but his jaw was still strong and his face was still very handsome. The Jade Dragon. Out of everyone, it's great to see you again, old pal. You're welcome, Lao Sheng. The years have been good to you, friend. It looks like you haven't changed at all in the 20 rain seasons since we were in danger together in battle. I wish I could say the same about you, Zhao. It seems like for every year I didn't get older, you did, and you did it well. I'm pretty envious because when I was young, I wanted to stroke a long white beard. Now that I'm old, I wish I could dream those dreams again. Even though I look young, I feel old. Her father laughed, which made her heart skip a beat. She hadn't heard him laugh in years. It seemed like he had pulled back into himself, further and further, putting up walls of ice and stone between the man she knew as her father and the man he was now. She had almost forgotten that he could do that. Daughter. She was caught. Had they known she was there the whole time? The apprentice of my friend can be found in the kitchens waiting for his master. Walk him through our simple home. He might be a little strange, but keep in mind that what you do affects our whole family. As you wish, father. Her face turned red as she walked to the kitchens. That had been rude. Spying wasn't something a lady should do, especially one of her status. Perhaps what was worse was getting caught. As she got closer to the kitchen, she could hear the murmurs of the kitchen staff. Even from here, she could hear the yammering of the women. They seemed to be very excited about something, which made her curious. As she got closer to the kitchen, her excitement grew until her stomach started to feel a little queasy. Was he grotesque, a monster of unimaginable ugliness, or a beast that pretended to be human but had sharp claws for hands and a twisted, gnarled mouth? Was he scarred and had leathery skin? She'd find out soon enough. When she finally got to the door to the kitchen, she took a moment to calm down, then slid it open. He wasn't a monster, not even close. He was as far from a monster as it might be physically possible to be. His hair was golden like the sun, and his eyes were blue like the sky. His face was so handsome that it made her stop breathing for a moment. He had 3 pairs of shallow scars on his cheeks, which made him look wild when combined with his spiky blonde hair. Hello. He had a strange accent, like someone from a port city, which explained his hair, eyes, and strange scars. Hello. The noise drew him out of his office. He couldn't have missed it, and if he had, it would have put him in a bad light with the clan. Not that the clan, or at least the branch half of it, had seen him in a good light lately. Shut up. The voice was definitely not that of a Hyuga. No Hyuga, not even a child, would be so rude as to scream so loudly in the clan compound. You're not right. You can't change your fate. And that was Neji. He frowned. His nephew had made so many mistakes and had so many regrets over the past few years. It didn't escape him that his brother had been the more skilled and talented of the two, and it was only by chance that he was clan head. Luck had been on his side since the day he was born. It was luck that he was born first. It was luck that his brother was there to block the kunai that would have killed him on his first C-rank mission. It was luck that his brother loved him enough to give his life so that he could live. Hiyashi had loved his brother, and now, despite what the boy might think, he loved his nephew. As the last of these thoughts came to him, he walked into the gardens, where he saw a blonde-haired boy arguing with his nephew. Neji seemed annoyed, that the blonde boy seemed even more so, with his fierce and determined sky-blue eyes and an active scowl that made his whiskered face look oddly fierce. Naruto Uzumaki turned around to look for their Junin sensei, Kakashi Hatake. Sure enough, he was sitting in a tree, smiling, and watching the fight with no interest. When their eyes met, Kakashi nodded, giving Naruto control of the situation. What does it look like is wrong? When he spoke, the argument stopped. Neji looked up in anger, then down in fear when he saw the look of irritation on his face. The Uzumaki boy didn't seem to care about any of it. He looked at Neji with blue eyes that were far, far, far too intense for his age. He says I'm not going to become anything. He isn't. He shouldn't even be here. Everyone was watching Kakashi Hatake's team. They were a group of young geniuses, but no one knew how good they were, how skilled they were right now, or how far they could go. Hiyashi looked at the blonde and noticed the headband around his forehead that pulled his wild, spiky hair close to his head. He turned back to his nephew and raised an eyebrow. He'd always been lucky, and it was luck that brought the Uzumaki boy and his team so close to him so. Everyone was watching the three kids in front of him. They could grow up to be like the Sannin, or even stronger than them. If Kakashi Hatake let anyone get close enough to watch, everyone would. He is wearing a headband. He is part of the group of genin who were hired to clean up the gardens. I don't know how you two got into trouble with each other, though, he said, turning to the tree where their sensei seemed to be lounging, either unaware or uninterested in what was going on. He scowled, and Kakashi Hatake was too good of a ninja to miss much, if anything. If you want to fight about it, we can go to the training grounds and you can spar with me to settle the matter. Kakashi then jumped down from the tree. He was smiling, but his eyes were as cold as ice. Hiyashi raised an eyebrow at the man. It seemed he wasn't as heartless as he made it seem. Also, the killing intent that landed on him and only him was a bit of a surprise. The blonde said, "I'll do it." Her eyes were as cold as ice. Naruto, you shouldn't fight the clients all the time. It's not a good habit. Hiyashi said, "No, Kakashi-san. I think this would be a good learning experience for both my nephew and your students." He almost had to gasp for air when the killing intent on him doubled. Kakashi's smile was gone, and now only ice-cold eyes stared at him. There was no pretense of friendliness in that face. "I think it's a good idea, sensei. I mean, we only fight each other, and we should fight other people our age, right?" A voice he hadn't heard yet caught his attention. It was the girl with pink hair. The Uchiha finally spoke up and said, "I want to see Naruto fight him." The three of them seemed to agree on something. Kakashi Hatake was quiet for a while, but then he gave in. "I guess that would be a good idea. We're done with the gardening, and Kakashi's eyes are still on him. Let's go to the training grounds," he says. After about 10 minutes, they got to the training grounds, and Hiyashi was a little bit excited. He wanted to know what the Hokage was trying so hard to keep secret. What was it about this team that he didn't want the general public to know? When they got there, the Hyuga training grounds were empty, except for a few mannequins marked with common tenketsu that all Hyuga children had to learn. The Uzumaki boy seemed excited, even though he was angry, and his chakra, which was very strong for someone so young, went up in anticipation and excitement. Kakashi's team and he watched from a distance as the two young boys went to the center of the training grounds. Naruto, no explosives. Hiyashi was surprised, but the pouty look on the blonde's face told him it wasn't a joke about him. The blonde pulled out a pair of kunai that were double the standard length and the color of chakra conducting metal. He twisted them in his hand and took a tight, clear stance. The head of the Hyuga clan called out, "Begin." Hiyashi realized that the blonde's speed was boosted by chakra. Of course, the children on Kakashi's team were still just that. Children. They weren't even teenagers yet. The only way they'd be able to fight older opponents would be through chakra-boosted skills and hard training. The gap closed before he could blink and before Neji could react. The Uzumaki boy danced around Neji for a few moments, lightly slashing and cutting him, before pulling away at the last second. Neji's chakra-enhanced palm was extended. The boy smirked and closed the gap again. He was fast, faster than Neji could react. Cuts, tiny little things started to appear all over Neji's body. Neji was losing. The Uzumaki boy was fast, and he used those kunai in a way that was very dangerous. Kakashi's voice was short when he said, "Naruto." The Uzumaki boy's speed doubled, the cuts stopped being shallow and got deeper, and Neji's shirt turned pink from his blood. "Naruto." Kakashi's voice was harder and more steely than ever. Finish it. Uzumaki Naruto did finish it. He stopped dancing around Neji and slammed the ringed handle of his blade into his nephew's head. Neji fell unconscious, and Hiyashi sighed. Don't you think he's pretty good? Kakashi Hatake didn't say anything, so he bent down and picked up his unconscious nephew. I think the garden is weed-free enough, Kakashi-san, he said. You and your team can leave, but stop by the kitchens and get something to drink. Today is pretty hot. Sharingan no Kakashi was an A-ranked ninja for a reason. My team is fine, Hiyashi-san. Hiyashi didn't say anything after that. Okay, you can go now. He grabbed his team by the shoulders, and in a puff of smoke, they were gone. Team 7 Sakura rolled under the blow, swung her leg out as she recovered, and brought her blonde teammate to the ground. Naruto cursed as he fell, and his world spun for a moment before he felt the pressure of her legs on his chest. Sakura's fist hit Naruto's head like a hammer, and Naruto's head snapped back, cracking against the ground. With a third punch, one of his teeth broke and his mouth split. He spit into her eyes and brought a fistful of dirt up with it. She jumped off of him, her face a mask of anger. Then Sasuke came, a black blur that crashed into him and knocked him over. He replaced himself almost immediately and dodged the sword swipe. When the technique was over, he was standing on the flat field of the training ground, watching his two teammates. He spit out more blood and raised an eyebrow at his two teammates. Sakura slammed her gloved fists together, and Sasuke smiled. This hardly seems fair. And your explosions are fair. Sakura looked a little annoyed. Her hair was all over the place and always looked like it had been burned. Everyone on Team 7 now smelled like chakra smoke. He couldn't help but grin. His explosive notes had become a bit of a worry in Team 7. Yes. He made a hand sign, and they vanished in a firestorm of roaring heat and explosive force. He just managed to dodge to the left as a series of fireballs came at his head. He felt a hand grab him and pull him to the ground. Sakura loved her grapples. In the tree above, Kakashi watched with a keen eye. Over the past few months, in between the monotony and the odd D rank his team had grown. He'd focused on practical combat, learning how to fight, and how to fight dirty. How to survive against tougher, stronger opponents just like his sensei had done to him. Naruto had taken to it like natural. Sasuke and Sakura had been hesitant too, but a few rounds of one-on-one with Naruto and they too had adopted it. But as they got stronger, so did the politicians' interest in them. Word of the fight between Hiyashi's nephew and Naruto spread, and soon all the major clans were calling for his team for the same reason. They wanted to test them out and see what they could do. Politics would soon start to affect his team. Kakashi raised his eyebrows as the focus of the battle changed. Sakura was now on the defensive as the boys pounded on her hard. Whenever there was a free-for-all, two teammates would attack one another. It was interesting. They seemed to do it without thinking, switching the focus of the battle from one another with just a few words. Sakura caught Sasuke's blade with a gloved hand, pulled him close, and drove a haymaker into his belly. Naruto tried to slash at the outstretched hand, but she pulled the appendage back and caught one of his knives. She swung them away, and her hand flashed through hand signs. Sasuke tried to dash forward to stop her, but suddenly fell over, gripping his stomach and retching. Naruto was barely standing himself, and looked almost drunk. He looked around and looked like he was going to throw up. Then, all of a sudden, he cut his palm open and blinked as he got his balance back. Holy crap. You like it? What the? Sasuke said from where he was sitting on the floor. It throws off your sense of balance by changing the flow of chakra in the inner ear. Sasuke threw up again and then pulsed his chakra to get out of the genjutsu. They were back on the attack, and Kakashi went back to thinking. The one thing they all had in common was that they were all good at fighting up close. Sasuke was a long-range and close-range fighter, launching ninjutsu from a distance before closing ranks and finishing things personally. Sakura could be considered a mid-range fighter, but her limited reserves limited the range of her genjutsu, and again, she was much more dangerous up close. He smiled, and the battle that was still going on in the training grounds moved again. Sasuke was on the defense, trying to stay out of reach of Sakura's genjutsu and avoiding Naruto's explosive kunai as best he could. Kakashi raised an eyebrow as the pool in the middle of the training ground disappeared in a fireball for the second time. Fucking hell, he'd have to pay for that again. Sasuke dodged another explosive kunai, his hands flashing through hand signs. He let out a roaring grand fireball, and his teammates rushed to either side. He closed in on Sakura and swung brutally, chakra running through his blade. She dodged a few swings, but more hit her than missed him. An extra deep cut made her shoulder swell up with blood, and Kakashi decided it was enough. He had made his choice, and his team was ready. He got on the ground and pushed his 3 little puppies away. They fell to the floor with a grunt and looked at him with angry eyes. What a great way to treat little kids badly, sensei. Ma, abuse you. You 3 complain all day about your poor sensei, and he laughed at them. Sensei, we can't move another inch. Sasuke can't breathe, sensei. Sensei, if you leave us in this forest for 2 weeks, we're going to die. You can't use us as targets, sensei. What? Sakura's indignant anger always made him smile. Sasuke really couldn't breathe. One of his lungs stopped working. Didn't I get him to the hospital? You want some cheese with your whining, Sakura? I never whined as much as you did when I was a chunin, he said, after he had helped them get back on their feet. Naruto added, I bet you did when you were a genin. Me a genin? Never. Your sensei was judged to be a chunin right after he graduated. It's a fact. And finally, Sasuke said, bullshit. What do they know, genin? He said in a condescending way and grabbed all 3 of them by the collars of their shirts. Let's go to lunch, and please don't complain. Or I'll leave you 3 out here for a few more days. Then we'll be able to go get our first C rank. They stopped floundering when he held them. C rank. Naruto spoke up, and he seemed very happy. Itachi, his brother, was now different. Sasuke, the sweet, innocent boy, had changed. His little brother was now a ninja, just like him, in the same way that his blonde-haired friend was like him. Months ago, he'd met Uzumaki Naruto in person. He'd seen the blonde boy with his wide-toothed smile and his watching, calculating eyes behind the mask of a child. They'd reached an unspoken agreement. But he hadn't realized how much Sasuke would change in the time since then. His fun-loving brother was still there, but the innocence was gone. He knew that would happen eventually, but still. He'd hoped deep down that Sasuke would stay the innocent little boy he'd seemed to be forever. Come on, Nii-chan, do you really think this is important? Itachi nodded and dodged a kick that was aimed at his head. He had always known that Sasuke was skilled and talented, but he hadn't thought that he was as smart as him. Now that he was sparring with him, he wondered how he hadn't seen it before, but Uzumaki Naruto had. He looked up at the sky. It was almost noon, and Sasuke was about to leave. Sasuke, if you don't get ready, you'll be late. Ask for some supplies at the Uchiha Armory. Idate-san will be glad to help you get them. Be polite, but short. His brother looked at him and nodded. Sasuke, be safe. His brother looked back at him with a smile and said, don't worry. Don't worry. How could he not worry? He had held Sasuke in his arms and realized how fragile a baby could be. He had promised his mother that he would always protect his brother, but now he couldn't. Don't worry. He couldn't, don't worry. Sasuke being Sasuke made that impossible. He sighed as he walked away from the clan training grounds. Sasuke wasn't the only thing on his mind. He was now captain. He moved as quickly as he could without drawing attention to himself in the compound. He was an Anbu captain. Kakashi Hitachi's rumored forced removal from Anbu had left a spot for captain open, and Itachi's squad decided to apply him for it. In Anbu, a captain can't be assigned. His squad has to make him captain. He saw a head of hair he didn't want, so he ran even faster to get away from it. Sushi caught him anyway, with a big smile on his face. Itachi, on the other hand, kept his face blank. Sushi. Are you still mad? No, so yes? He gave his squadmate and best friend an icy look and said, no. Oh, Itachi, don't worry, it won't be that bad. You'll be a great leader. You are the youngest captain in the history of Konoha. You even beat Sharingan no Kakashi. The only reason I got the job is because Sharingan no Kakashi quit, Sushi said with a small laugh and a smile that didn't waver. Look, we have a job to do, he said. He grabbed the scroll Sushi threw at him without even thinking about it. He looked at it with his eyes and then burned it when he was done. Assassination? Yes, I'm also surprised. Almost never do they send out teams to kill people. Usually alone. Let's go. Sushi looked back at him, his smile gone. Look, Itachi, if I didn't think you'd be a good leader, I wouldn't have put you in charge of the team. They would have never accepted you if they didn't think you could be trusted with their lives. I said I wasn't mad about it, he said, but I was a little worried. Thanks. No problem. Naruto Sakura's parents were afraid of him. He sat in quiet, with a smile on his face. eating the rice and steamed fish they had made. He could feel it and see it in their eyes, or more specifically in the way they avoided looking at him. He could tell that Sakura was also aware of it. They were polite and nice, but they were scared in a way he wasn't used to. They were nervous and shaky, which made him feel a little uneasy. He had done nothing to make people afraid, that was it. He hadn't done anything. He wasn't the loud, rude child who needed attention. He wasn't pulling pranks and running around the village making a fool of himself. He'd forced people to notice him, even if it was just as an annoying little brat. Because they didn't know him, they were afraid. "Thank you so much for making this meal." Thanks, Naruto-san." They seemed to be very careful with him. He smiled at them, beaming with wide teeth, and let small amounts of his chakra roll over them in small, smoothing waves. Sakura noticed right away, but when she looked between him and her parents, her eyebrows dropped. The nervous looks they were giving him slowed down, and they ate their food instead of picking at it like they were doing before. "Naruto-san?" This was the first time Sakura's mother spoke the whole dinner. "Yes. She took a moment to think. "I don't really know you well enough to ask you that, Naruto-san. But please, Sakura. I know she's talented like you are, but she's still my little girl. No one would die. No one would have to sacrifice themselves." He wasn't the monster he'd been on the battlefield. His chakra capacity wasn't even close to what it had been before he came back. He couldn't even use Kurama's chakra without it killing him, or damn close to it. But no one, absolutely no one would die. Even on a simple escort mission to Suna, they wouldn't do that. "Don't be afraid. We're a good team, and this is just a simple escort mission. If something goes wrong, Kakashi-sensei will be with us. As long as he's there, we'll be fine," he said with a smile as he gave them more of his chakra. He finished the last of his food and helped Sakura clean the table. Then he walked home, his mind racing. He wasn't the same little boy. He wasn't a little boy at all, at least not mentally. He'd seen his friends die, felt their blood spill on his skin. He'd seen them die for him, spend their lives to give him a few more precious moments. So when he got there, he was determined. He trained slowly and carefully, keeping an eye out for chances to learn the things he already knew. He grabbed Sasuke, saved him, and tied them together as quickly as he could, because he would need Sasuke like he needed air, like flowers need bees. The two couldn't reach their full potential without each other. And Sakura, who was the only reason the two of them kept going back after reaching death's door over and over and over again. As he walked home, he looked around and noticed that people were staring. He had learned long ago to ignore their stares, whether they were out of spite or admiration. But now the stares were different. It wasn't the anger or resentment from his childhood. It wasn't the hero worship, adoration, or regret and shame from his later years. It was fear. Unjustified fear. But still fear. Another problem he would have to deal with. The gray or green village gates stood out in front of him like huge rocks. He was so excited that it made his heart beat faster, and he had to fight to keep the crazy grin off his face. Naruto was sitting behind them, near the road that led into the village. He was sitting under a tree. His wild blonde hair shone in the light of the rising sun. He held a scroll in his hand and flipped through it with his eyes. On the main road through the village, a long line of big carts with wide wheels moved slowly past him. On his back was a small travel pack with a few extra sets of clothes and weapons, as well as some bandages, ointments, and antibiotics in case he got sick. When he saw them, he frowned. In total, 12. With only 4 people, they would have to watch over 12 long carts, or 3 carts for each person. He made a sad face and looked around for his teacher. He felt his chakra rise and saw a flash of silver hair in a tree on the other side of the road. He gave his sensei a nod, and then he did the same thing to Naruto. Naruto gave him a smile in return, then went back to his scroll. He took another look around and frowned. Sakura wasn't here, even though she was the one who was always on time. "Sensei, where's Sakura?" Kakashi sighed and jumped down from the tree. Sasuke's eyes twitched in anger. Even before Kakashi said a word, he could feel the words of rebuke touching him. Sensei didn't say nice things about any of them very often, and when he did, it often came across as an insult. Sasuke, you could look around for her. It's not like she's near the front of the caravan," Kakashi-sensei seemed to say, but he was wrong. Kakashi-sensei did in fact enjoy being an ass. He turned and walked away after saying, "Thank you, sensei." After a few minutes, he found her talking to the client. He might have been the oldest living person Sasuke had ever seen. His hair was so gray that it looked like silver. The wrinkles on his skin looked like they were etched with even smaller, finer wrinkles that made it seem like he had more wrinkles than he did. He almost didn't have any teeth when he smiled, and on his chin you could see the ragged remains of a beard. Sakura sat with him and paid close attention to what he said. "I remember when I was a boy and this village had just been built a few years before," he said after taking a breath. "This whole road was covered in trees," he said, then laughed. "Your name made sense then. My family got lost trying to find the village to trade. After we sold our goods, my father was angry and swore he'd never come back. But the prices were good, so the next year we made the trip again, and he swore even louder that he'd never come back." The old man's smile got a little bit bigger. "I like it better without the road." He smiled at Sasuke with a toothless grin as he turned to talk. "Oh, and a third little munchkin shows up," he said with another laugh. Sasuke looked at the old man, turned around, and then looked at his teammate with blonde hair. He thought about them both for a few seconds. Then he frowned, and in the end, he gave up his attempt. He was just too old to be compared to anyone else. When he finally turned around to face her and their client, Sakura spoke up. "Sasuke-kun." She seemed to be in a good mood, and he couldn't help but smile. "This is Takagaki Hirayasu-san. He was telling me about his life and the route we were taking." "Sakura," he greeted. "Are you ready?" "Yes," he said, and turned to ask the old man. He smiled and took a map out of the cart he was sitting on. He jumped down, and Sasuke was surprised to see that his hunched form was only a little bit taller than he was. He saw that Kakashi and Naruto had been able to get to them while Hirayasu-san was busy. "See, kids? For the next few days, we're going to move along the main. After that, we're going to move northeast into Rice Country." "I thought we were going to Suna?" she asked. The old man just smiled and kept talking. "From there, it's a week-and-a-half trip south into Wind Country using the Shinen Pass. The fabrics and tea from Konoha sell better in Rice than in Wind. From there, we head to Suna with a load of fresh fruits, rice, and grains. Normally, I'd take the remaining goods from Konoha to Iron Country to trade from metals and circle back to Konoha. But my grandson is finally old enough, and he's going to be taking the rest." Naruto before his eyes, the vast plains of Rice Country looked like a sea of green. They walked slowly along a natural path that had been used 1,000 times before for similar trips. As he walked next to a cart in the middle of the caravan, he looked ahead at the road. Nothing. He smiled, thinking that for his first C rank, this wasn't so bad. Especially since the first time didn't go so well. The trip to Rice went amazingly well. They got there 2 days early and were able to leave in just 1 day. He smiled at the good luck that they would be in Suna in a few more days. He had to stop himself from laughing. Gaara was still alone and scared as a child, but one of his best friends was still there for him. He could help this person right now. We would help him even if he didn't know how. He'd help Gaara. Everyone in Suna would see what a good person he was. Buddha. He decided it was best not to think about it right now and instead focused on other things. His skills had been getting better over the past few months, but he thought he would have fixed a big hole in his skill set by now. The Bushin Cage. His signature jutsu wasn't available to him, or at least he didn't know how to find out. There was no way for him to explain it away, no reason that didn't sound like a lie and make his sensei and the Sandaime even more suspicious. He didn't like that. Instead, he had to think about and work on the limited set of skills he could explain. Mainly his limited knowledge of Fuinjutsu and the fact that he likes to fight in close quarters. The kunai, and especially the exploding kunai, was his favorite weapon. Because of Kakashi's sensei and what the man thought of as training, his aim had gotten very good. Even though he was small, he was a good fighter because of that and the modified trench knives his sensei gave him. Kakashi sensei said as he slapped his shoulder with a hard palm. "Don't let your mind wander, Naruto," his sensei told him. He nodded and turned back to the tall grass. He took a kunai out of its holster and spun it around his hand as fast as he could. He looked around at the still grass. He didn't see anything, but he was still on the lookout. He looked up at the taller man and said, "Thanks, sensei." The man gave him an eye smile in return. "No problem," he said. As the carts kept going down the road, he thought about his skills again. In the long run, his skill growth would be hurt by not having Kage Bushin. Even though he remembered most of what he had learned, there were some ideas and skills that he would need his clones to study or even do. Maybe soon, he sighed. The blue eyes went back to the tall, wild grass. It was a lush green that reached high along the path and moved in the wind without being told to. He stopped because the wind was making the grass move. When he looked back at his sensei gave him a blink and a smile. "What is it, Naruto?" He looked around and saw that the grass had stopped moving. He took a kunai out of its sheath and spun it in his hand. He made chakra in the palm of his hand and threw it. The instrument of death flew into the tall grass, and he laughed as several explosions happened. As a result, shuriken started flying out of the grass. He dove and saw Kakashi pulling the old man behind one of the carts to protect him. He grabbed more kunai and threw them farther into the grass, causing more explosions that were so loud they were almost deafening. He felt his chakra rise, and as a fireball went by him, its heat set the grass on fire. He hid behind the cart and laid down next to it. He waited for a while for a counterattack, but nothing happened. "Well, it looks like they ran away, so let's get back on the road," Kakashi said as he picked him up and rubbed him on the back. "Good job, guys. You're almost as good as I was when I was half your age." Naruto groaned. As Daiichiro looked down at Yajin's severed arm, he muttered, "Fucking hell." He was in a bad way. He was in a very bad way. His blood was dripping on the floor, and he couldn't see out of his eyes. Yajin had shrapnel stuck in his side, and his legs and stomach were badly burned. He was probably going to die because their squad didn't have a medic and nothing he did, no matter how pitiful, would help. "Daiichiro, you stupid fucking moron. I told you to let them pass, and I told you we shouldn't fucking try for them." He snapped at Seiko, "Shut up." Yajin tried to talk, but all he could do was moan and sputter. "Shut the hell up." He sat down in the matted grass and looked down. Yajin's blood was still all over the floor, and the smell of rich iron filled the small space they had made. He said, "A bunch of fucking little jerks," and his hand tightened in anger. Seiko sat next to him, and as she did, her short, black hair moved in the wind. "Look," he sighed. The last thing he needed right now was for her to tell him how wrong he was. Just fuck. "I knew something was wrong. Konoha wouldn't send out a bunch of brats like that if they weren't at least decent. And look who was with them, Kakashi fucking Hatake. You should have listened to me. Now Yajin's dead. He's still alive. He's missing an arm and has third-degree burns. He might as well be dead. You think your bad first aid can fix a missing arm?" She pointed to the mangled limb where fresh blood still dripped like water from a leaky faucet. The smell of blood was awful and made him feel sick. Daiichiro looked down and made a grumpy face. Seiko was right. Fuck. Fuck Kakashi Hatake. Fuck his little jerks, and fuck Yajin and his terrible genjutsu skills. He let out a sigh and took out his kunai. "We still have to stop the caravans," he said with a frown as he looked down at Yajin. "The trade route through Shinen Pass has to be closed." Maybe. He stopped talking and let the silence fill the space for a few moments. "I'm sorry." That was the end of it. A few hours later, when Yajin's body was buried, Daiichiro said what he and Seiko were feeling at the time. Fuck Kakashi Hatake. Sakura the night was very dark and took up everything. It was like a boulder on her chest, pressing down on her senses. She could barely see more than a few meters ahead of her, and even that was only possible because of the dim light from the campfire. The moon was supposed to be out, but there were dark clouds in the sky that blocked its light in the light of the stars in the distance. She sat in her tree branch and tried as hard as she could to keep watch. Kakashi Sensei was sitting on top of another tree a long way away. His one eye looked into the dark with only a little bit of interest. He looked like he was bored, but with Sensei, you could never really tell for sure how he felt. "Sakura," the voice of Sensei said. "Hi? Push a little chakra to your ears and nose," he said. She did what he said, and the darkness went away. Not that it got brighter all of a sudden, but that her senses got better. She could hear Naruto's heart beating quickly, but softly. It sounded like raindrops hitting sheet metal. Both Sasuke's and the old man's heart were slow and steady, but they beat at different times. "Thank you, Sensei." He didn't say anything else and looked back at the trees. She moved to a spot that was a little bit more comfortable and sat there, watching and waiting. A few days had passed since the attack on the road, and Team 7 had been on edge pretty much the whole time. Kakashi was sure that an attack would happen soon, so for the past few days, the sensei had been staying up to watch, and one of them had gone with him to help. Sakura clenched her gloved fists and turned her head clockwise toward the sound of leaves rustling. Before she said anything, Sensei was already moving. "Wake up the boys," he said as he made a series of hand gestures. A small dog with a fat nose and a bored look on its face was revealed by a puff of chakra smoke a second later. Pakun. Ma, Kakashi, it's been a while, she said. It's been a few months. The dog sniffed deeply and turned to face her. Really, Kakashi? Isn't she a little too young? Sakura stiffened, but she wasn't too young to be a ninja. I passed the genin test, which means I'm old enough to be a ninja, Kakashi said. The dog laughed and barked, then turned back to Kakashi. That's not what I was talking about, brat, it said with a sly grin, and Kakashi-sensei gave it a deadpan look. I thought I told you to wake up the boys, Sakura. She blinked and then climbed down from the trees. She went to Sasuke's tent and gave him a kick in the side. Then she did it twice more to make sure he was still awake. Wake up, Sasuke, he mumbled, and then he finally said a word that could be heard. No, sensei told you to wake up, she said. He groaned and got up. Stood up after a sleepy look around. She went to Naruto's tent while Sasuke tried to figure out where he was. He was already awake, holding a trench kunai and looking very serious. I heard you wake up that jerk, she said with a smile, and then she went back. When they saw Kakashi waiting for them, the dog he had called over was sitting next to him, looking surprisingly bored. Pakun and one of my clones will watch the client. You three will stay together and guard the caravan. I'll go out and look for anything suspicious. Naruto, he turned the kunai in his hand as he looked at the dark sky with no moon. He felt a tightness in his chest, and he couldn't help but make his frown stand out. Those who had attacked his team were out there, and he was ready for them. He was close to the end of the group. The wind changed direction, and he could just barely smell something. He dodged and fell from the tree branches into the dark underbrush. He had to be careful because Sensei wasn't there, at least not in person. He didn't even have a tenth of his original chakra yet, and his body was still too young to do much damage to an adult opponent. But if people thought he was too small, well, Naruto had killed Uzumaki in the past to protect his friends. He'd kill again to keep them safe and make sure they had good lives. He stood there and watched. When he heard a rustle in the leaves above him, he threw an explosive kunai at them. It hit a tree and blew up, sending shrapnel and tree pieces flying in a mix of death and tree bark. He rolled quickly when a kunai hit the spot where he had been a few seconds earlier. You know, for a little brat, you're pretty cute, she said. He looked around and saw nothing. That yellow hair, and those puffy cheeks, he said. He heard a light giggle and stopped moving in the dark. It's too bad I'm going to have to cut your throat from ear to ear. He closed his eyes and took long, slow breaths. He had to stay calm, so keep calm. He had dealt with more dangerous people, fought, and come close to dying dozens of times. He took out more kunai and threw them to his left, where he thought he had heard the voice. The tree blew up, and he heard a grunt and then the sound of rocks breaking. He smiled. Sakura was going on the attack. He took a scroll out of his pocket and spread it out. He sent chakra to his legs and then jumped high while twirling. It rained kunai, and there were explosions all through the night. He heard another painful grunt and the sound of trees being cut down, so he went after them. Team 7 was on the move, and he wouldn't let anything happen to his friends. Sasuke tried to cut off that arm by ducking, weaving, swinging up, and rolling to avoid the kunai through the ribs. She moved away, which made Sasuke attack. Chakra was moving through the gray blade of his sword. She was fast, but really fast, but Sensei made sure he was as fast as he could be. He didn't dance around her so much as he did with her. He did his best to go with the flow of her attack. You little brats are pretty good, did you know that? He moved out of the way of her kuna swing and repositioned himself just in time to avoid a rock mountain that rose up and hit where he had been standing. He changed himself 3 more times to keep them from getting too close. He took out a kunai and threw it. It blew up, and she grunted in irritation. He heard a string of explosions off in the distance and smiled. Naruto was having fun, and from what he could hear, he was trying to figure out who was attacking him and why they were going after Sakura. He smiled and made a bunch of hand signs quickly. The heat for the fire jutsu built up in his chest and rose slowly as the pressure went through his lungs. Then he spat out hot, burning fire and lit up the night. When she chose that time to attack, he moved out of the way and grinned. She was fast as hell, but Sasuke was faster. He took the knife out of its sheath and cut through her arm in one swift motion. The world stopped, she looked shocked and surprised, and then she turned into a pile of mud. Sasuke tightened his grip on his blade and laughed. He went in the direction of the explosions. Maybe he'd find Naruto before the explosion-obsessed idiot destroyed Rice County's only forest. Sakura thought for a moment that she had really defeated a Junin on her own. Just for a moment, for a few precious seconds, she thought she had killed the Jonin by hitting her in the head and making her brain ooze out. Then she turned into mud, and Sakura had to jump back to keep the ground from swallowing her whole. She landed on the side of a tree, jumped off, climbed into the tree's branches, and tried to hide as best she could. She kept moving, of course. She didn't think she was hidden, and she knew that sitting still would kill her. In reality, she was just waiting for the boys to find her and give her a chance. She didn't think she could beat a Junin, even if she was good with her mud clones. You know, you little brats are all pretty good. Sakura jumped from where she was standing instead of answering, then put her foot on a tree branch in front of her and fell into the underbrush of the forest. The moon was shining brightly above her, and she could hear Naruto's enthusiasm going off not too far away. She figured out from the way he was moving and where he was going that he was trying to get in her way. Which meant that Sasuke had also figured out what was going on and was also heading her way. She stopped for a moment to catch her breath and tightened her gloved fists. She almost lost her mind over it, and she ducked under a kunai that was thrown at her. The woman with dark hair was back. She was almost as tall as Sensei and thin, and her skin was a little bit too pale. She was wearing a Junin vest. Sakura didn't waste her chakra trying to use genjutsu. It was a mud clone. I really don't like hurting kids, you know, but the clone lunged forward, and she had to lean back, tuck her legs in, and roll back. She turned herself into a log to get away. Before the kunai got halfway to where she'd thrown it, the clone closed the gap. Damn it, she said, and she jumped back again, trying to get away from a fight. Even though she was strong with her gloves, the woman was stronger. She didn't have Naruto's explosions to make up for the fact that genjutsu didn't work on elemental clones. She dove again when she heard kunai's whizzing, and she blinked as it buried itself in the mud clone and blew up. Naruto. Sakura-chan, her teammate with blonde hair, whimpered. He landed next to her and reached into his pockets for more. He gave her a bunch and gave her a sly smile. Eyes that shine bright blue in the light. When he turned around, they put their backs against each other. She is using clones of elements. Ah, he said in reply. Okay, then let's find the real one, he said. She blinked and fought the urge to turn around and slap him. She instead kept her eyes on the forest. Easier said than done. My sensing skills aren't very good, and yours are worse than mine. She tapped the back of Naruto's hand as a sign to move somewhere else and ran back into the trees. A few seconds later, they got back together. Naruto often said things that were obvious, like, the forests were working to her advantage. Yes, I do know that. Should we get rid of the forest? She asked with a blink. Thought about it. Then he turned red at the thought. It was good, easy, and dumb, but she looked at her teammate and blinked. You're carrying enough bombs to blow up a forest? He laughed and took out a big scroll of paper. Add to that. Kakashi, even though the explosions were about 1.5 miles away from Kakashi Hatake, they didn't make him feel better about his blonde student. Even as he went after his prey, he thought about how many weapons his blonde student was carrying. The explosions had been going on for about 10 minutes, which was very unusual in the ninja world, and there was no sign that they would stop anytime soon. He blinked and decided that maybe it would be best to teach the pups some more jutsu. If they put too much stock in one skill, they would die young. Kakashi Hatake. Yes. And you are? Daiichiro. He nodded and opened Obito's eye. He knew right away that his chakra was being slowly drained. This was a pretty dumb attack, don't you see? The man with brown hair said. He didn't say anything else, but instead ran forward. They joined hands and danced for a while. Kakashi agreed that he was good. Fast, with precise movements that don't waste much energy. Even though he was fast, he also had a good amount of strength. Still, Obito's eyes showed everything. The thing about the human mind was that it started doing things before you even knew it. More than 90% of the decisions you made were made by your subconscious mind first, and then they were sent to your conscious mind. In your conscious mind, you then thought of reasons to back up your decisions. Before Daiichi even knew he wanted to use the jutsu, he saw the change in his chakra. He watched the flow, the hand signals, and the tricks, and then he did the same things. Over and over until he said the words as Daiichiro mumbled them. Earth release, earth flow spears. Junin didn't have to scream out the names of their jutsu like Genin, but saying the name of the technique out loud as he copied it made his opponents nervous. He jumped into the air as spears of hardened rock rose from the ground on both sides of the forest. He couldn't copy the man's additional jutsu, so he turned himself into a log a few meters away and did his own jutsu. Lightning release. Lightning quake flash. The air was full of lightning sparks, and he watched as his target was hit and turned into a log. He laughed, took a scroll out of one of his pockets, and spread it out. He chewed on his thumb and then called up his Anbu standard issue katana. He smiled as he felt the weight of the weapon in his hand. He was no longer a scarecrow. But he still had people to look out for. Seiko. She dodged the little girl with pink hair's punch. Its speed was so fast that it scared her, and the fact that it broke the boulder she had used to stand on into pieces scared her even more. She frowned and thought about what she could do. They would have to die. They were too skilled and good for their age. If they were just snot-nosed brats or just slightly above average, she wouldn't have even thought about it. But they were too good and worked so well together, and they'd killed Yajin, so she had to think about it. Even if she hadn't cared much about the man, dying like that on some shit B-level mission offered by some explosion-happy blonde brat would have been a lot to take. He should have died in a better way. She changed places again and swung out with her leg to push the kid with black hair back. Really. They worked pretty well together, better than she had even with her original team, and she had loved her two idiots like brothers before. Well, that was a war ago. She replaced herself again and dodged more explosions. She grunted as she jumped back to avoid a fireball coming from behind her. The kid with black hair who had burned off half of Yajin's face had come. The brat with the blonde hair was so annoying. She saw gold with silver accents and jumped away just in time to avoid a swipe from an extended kunai. She saw a few glimpses of light blue. Deep blue eyes as bright as the summer sky were in a small face with a tan. She had seen those eyes and that hair before. It reminded her of when she was a little girl, when she had eyes as blue as the sky and hair as yellow as gold. A genin who had just graduated from the academy and was sent to an outpost a few miles from one of Iwa's main supply routes. He came in without making a sound, and her sensei fell to the floor, blood pooling around his feet as his throat bled out. Before he even knew what had happened, and before she had figured out what the flash meant, he was already dead. Her sensei had died like an animal. He, too, should have died in a better way. Then he killed the rest of the garrison. In just a few seconds, he killed 24 Chunin and Jonin. Flashing around the base, throwing kunai and killing people like wheat. He was back in front of her and the rest of her team. He had golden hair and blue eyes. The blue was the darkest and brightest she had ever seen. Even though there were dead bodies all around him and he had killed people, she remembered his face. This was true even though he had killed more than 24 people. He had no blood on him at all. He looked at them with a frown as he saw them run away. "I don't kill kids," he said. Then, in a bright flash, he was gone. Like that hadn't meant anything. The words kept going through her mind. "I don't kill kids." Namikaze Minato should have been killed before he got his headband. Maybe he didn't kill kids. She would, though. It hit her all of a sudden. Golden hair, the same eyes, a team that was way better than it should have been, and Kakashi fucking Hitaki. It made sense. Namikaze Minato's son would be just as smart as he was if he had one. If Namikaze Minato had a child, it would be a secret in Konoha. Obviously, if Namikaze Minato had a child, the man's now famous student would teach him. She didn't try to avoid the pink one's punch. Instead, she used chakra to protect her arms and block the blow. She grunted as she felt a break move up her arm, but she didn't pay attention to the pain. She grabbed the girl and pulled her close. Then she pulled the girl down with her. When she hit the ground, she hit her head as hard as she could, once, twice, and 3 times, before giving her nose a vicious punch. It broke, and her hands were stained with blood. She tried to grab her head and stop it, but she had to jump back. The short gray sword that was almost invisible in the moonlight almost cut off her head. Even though her arm hurt a lot, she couldn't help but notice that he was now looking at her with blood-red eyes and a single tomoe swirling around his iris. It would have to be Uchiha. She made a copy of herself out of mud and watched as a blonde fell from a tree above and killed the copy that was her. The Namikaze's servant and the Uchiha got together. She grunted, and her chakra flared as her will got stronger. They acted like spoiled brats. Good, but she could do it herself. She would kill the blonde brat and stop another Namikaze from growing up to kill Iwa's people. "Ma," a voice from the forest said. She looked up at the trees and frowned when she saw the bloodied body of Kakashi Hitaki. "I can't leave you 3 alone, can I? Naruto, Sasuke, take Sakura and run. I'll take care of it from here." He had a katana in one hand and a single sharingan out. She asked him, "Daiichiro?" "Dead." She saw that his katana was almost all bloody. She gave a nod, but why? What else could he do? "You can leave, or you can die." She looked past him to where the blonde jerk's child had gone into the darkness. She looked at him, where the blonde-haired jerk's student was standing still as death. She chose what to do and left. Her teammates were dead, but now Iwa knew, and one day. As far as Iwa was concerned, there would be no second coming of Namikaze Minato. XX authors note XXX. I have another idea for a story. Written in reverse by J. Menace was the inspiration for this one. Check out his story. I like it a lot, and it's one of the few fanfictions I still read when I have time. One small step. When the battle was over, Kakashi looked around slowly. His students were still alive, but only just. Naruto and Sasuke were tired and fell asleep on the bridge. He sighed and looked up at the bright sky. White wisps of clouds were moving across the dark, wide blue spaces. Overall, it went better than he thought it would. "Sakura, help me get the boys," he shouted as he slowly walked toward his male students. Then the sky got dark, and I had a feeling. He felt something that was hard to put into words. There was a deep, all-consuming feeling that all the energy in the world had gathered in one place. There was also a sense of awe that something was going on. It made him feel sick and terrible, like something awful, unnatural, and inhuman had happened above him. He looked up at the sky. There were no more clouds, and the sky. There had been a retch in space-time, a terrible warping of the sky, a great wretched scar that seemed to rip through the once endless blue, turning it deep, deep, deep black. Before the jagged edge of its edge, light seemed to fade, and inside, in the deep, eternal black, there were many stars. A billion white dots on a deep, eternal black background. It was amazing, scary, and a lot like real life. Obito's Sharingan told him that it wasn't an illusion and that he was actually looking at something. The edge of existence coming apart for just a split second. Moving around but staying still, in a beautiful but hard to understand way. He blinked, and the tear began to move, as if the fact that he was looking at it made it unstable. Then, two figures fell at once. He fell from the impossible thing hanging above him, down, 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 until he finally hit the ground. They fell into the water below, which made the water crash against the bridge's beams. One little step, time is a dimension. A thing that is almost flat and moves in and out of, over, and through every atom, molecule, and string of existence in all limited dimensional planes. Every second, minute, hour, and year, as well as every choice a person could ever make or not make, happens at the same time. We just experience a tiny part of its huge spherical mass. The sphere moves sometimes. All of existence's intertwined strings get weaker, and in these moments, these brief flashes of something, you can squeeze through the strings. You have to force your way through the web of life and go beyond. For just a second, or a small part of a second, but that was all they needed. Sasuke, she loved Uzumaki Naruto. She would never say it out loud, and she would only tell him when they were alone in a very private place, but she loved the idiot. She cared for him. She didn't love him as strongly as she did Itachi, whom she both loved and hated, but differently. It was hard to explain to someone what you needed from them. You always want them, you always expect them to be there, and you can't imagine that they won't be. The way her heart had fluttered when they were standing there in the Valley of the End. Her headband was in his hand, and he was staring at her with eyes that were the same clear blue as the sky above them. He had a sad look on his face. Blood was pooling under his feet. She couldn't believe what he'd done. She said in a whisper, "Moron." She asked, "Why?" She tried to hold back tears, bile, and disgust at herself. Because, at that point, he stopped and took a deep, slow, and tired breath. Then he coughed a horrible, awful cough that still comes back to her in her dreams. He held her arms and looked right into her eyes. "I love you." "No, god damn it." "No," he had then smiled. If that happened, everything would be fine. When she laughed, it sounded more like a sad groan than anything else. She thought he was about to die. The fool was killing himself on her. No, she used her other hand to brush a deep red hair off his head. She had kissed him instead of telling him. It tasted like salt, blood, and sweat. Yeah. Smiling and dying. He had filled a small part of the deep hole in her mind and heart that Itachi had made, and now he was smiling and dying and bleeding and loving her. Idiot. Idiot with too much energy and too much hope. After a while of standing there, she finally took her hand off his chest. She couldn't forget the look on his face when she did that. The look on his face was a mix of confusion, fear, anger, and a little bit of love. Sasuke a bastard. Iya.
So this was it for today. I will continue the story next part. Till then, we weeb offline.